The shattered doorstep. The tranquil veil of night was brutally torn apart just past 1 in the morning, an hour reserved for deep slumber and fleeting dreams. But for some, the darkest hours unleashed the most harrowing realities. What if the sanctuary of your own home became the stage for a nightmare, delivered by your own child, broken and bleeding, whispering a confession that would shatter your entire world? This isn't just a story. It's a raw, visceral journey into the heart of a mother's rage, a police officer's unwavering resolve, and a daughter's desperate fight for survival against a betrayal so profound it threatened to consume everything. You won't believe the depths to which depravity can sink, nor the extraordinary lengths one woman will go to reclaim what was stolen. This is a testament to an unbreakable spirit, a relentless pursuit of justice that will leave you breathless and questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty and vengeance. Don't dare look away, because this is a saga where every twist and turn unravels a truth more shocking than the last. I had just managed to switch off the television, the blue light of the screen fading into the oppressive darkness of my living room, before my weary body sagged onto the worn cushions of the sofa. My eyelids, heavy as lead, struggled to remain open. It had been an exceptionally long and draining shift, even for a cop in this often turbulent town. My job wasn't always a dramatic dance between life and death, but that day had been a relentless series of petty disputes, culminating in a particularly nasty brawl at the downtown bar. The ensuing paperwork had kept me chained to my desk until the early hours, each word I typed feeling heavier than the last. My bones ached. My muscles screamed for respite, and all I craved was the oblivion of deep, dreamless sleep. Outside, the familiar symphony of the neighborhood played on, a chorus of distant dog barks, punctuated by the angry buzz of motorcycles as local teenagers sped through the streets. It was well past 1 a.m., yet the night refused to yield to silence. I pictured the usual crowd of young men gathered on the street corner, their laughter punctuated by the clinking of beer bottles, a nightly ritual in defiance of the dawn. I closed my eyes, willing the cacophony to recede, hoping for even a moment of peace. Suddenly, a frantic, thunderous knocking erupted at my front door, so violent and unexpected it jolted me upright, sending a jolt of raw adrenaline through my exhausted frame. My heart, a startled bird, hammered against my ribs, and decades of police instinct surged to the forefront of my mind. Who in the world could be knocking with such urgency at this ungodly hour? I muttered under my breath, my voice barely a whisper. I moved quickly, almost instinctively, towards the entrance, my hand closing tightly around the sturdy leg of a nearby wooden chair, a makeshift weapon against an unknown threat. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice betraying a slight tremor, not from fear but from a profound sense of foreboding that settled heavy in my gut. There was no immediate answer, only a couple more weaker knocks, followed by a choked, trembling whisper that cut through the silence like a jagged shard of glass. "Mom, open up, please." My blood ran cold. It was the unmistakable voice of Sarah, my daughter. A fresh wave of terror, far more potent than any I'd felt on the beat, washed over me. A mother's vow. With a desperate lurch, I fumbled with the locks, my fingers clumsy and uncooperative in my haste. The door swung inward, and in that same instant, Sarah collapsed into my waiting arms, a fragile, trembling weight. She felt limp, devoid of all strength, like a wounded animal seeking refuge. I held her tight, the warmth of her fragile body a stark contrast to the icy dread seizing my soul. "Sarah, my precious, what on earth happened to you?" I stammered, my voice cracking with unshed tears. The harsh, unforgiving glow of the yellow porch light mercilessly illuminated her face, and the sight that greeted me paralyzed me with shock and unspeakable horror. Her lip was brutally split, a dark, dried streak of blood marring its corner. Her left eye, a grotesque canvas of swollen purple, was almost entirely sealed shut. Her thin hands clutched frantically at her stomach, as if trying to conceal an agonizing pain that seeped from her very core. "My husband! He hit me because of his mistress!" Sarah gasped, her voice a raw, tortured whisper before it dissolved into heart-wrenching, guttural sobs that tore through the stillness of the night. In that single agonizing moment, I felt a searing inferno of rage ignite deep within my veins, yet simultaneously, my heart fractured into a million pieces. My daughter, the very essence of my being, the child I had raised with every fiber of my love, standing before me utterly shattered. Without a word, I guided her into the house, her steps faltering and weak. I gently laid her on the sofa, a stark contrast to the domestic peace it usually offered, and then I sprinted to the kitchen. My hands moved on autopilot, grabbing a damp cloth and the familiar first aid kit. "Stay still, honey. Let me see," I managed to say, forcing a calmness into my voice that I was far from feeling. Inside, I was a tempest of fear and fury. I carefully, almost reverently, began to clean the congealed blood from her torn lip. But it continued to seep, a fresh, raw red that felt as though it were cutting into my own flesh. The wound was deep, far more than just a surface abrasion. It hinted at a profound, insidious damage. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to clutch her stomach, her slender hands quivering uncontrollably. With the utmost gentleness, I carefully peeled her hands away and lifting her blouse, I stifled a gasp that threatened to escape. Oh my God! A monstrous bruise, a sickening tableau of black and purple, consumed her abdomen. It wasn't just a single blow, but many, delivered with vicious, unrelenting force. It felt as though I, too, had received each brutal strike, leaving me breathless, gasping for air. "Sarah, who did this to you? It was Robert, wasn't it?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of raw pain and an almost uncontrollable surge of rage. Sarah offered no reply, only more heart-wrenching sobs that echoed through the otherwise silent house. Without a second thought, my hand instinctively reached for the phone. I dialed the number I knew by heart, the emergency room of our small town's hospital. "Dr. Figueroa, please get ready. I'm bringing my daughter in," I said, my voice clipped and urgent. My own car was inconveniently in the shop, undergoing brake repairs, so I quickly hailed a taxi. While we waited, I sat beside Sarah, wrapping her gently in a blanket to shield her from the lingering chill. Her cell phone, lying innocently on the coffee table, pulsed with an insistent light. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 7 missed calls from Robert, and a string of messages flashing across the lock screen. "Open your mouth if you want to lose everything." The words were like a physical blow, sending a surge of molten blood rushing to my head. My hand shot out, eager to snatch the phone, to delve deeper, to uncover the full extent of his cruelty. But Sarah, despite her profound weakness, snatched it away from me in a sudden, panicked movement. "Mom, don't look. It's nothing," she whispered, her eyes wide with a terror that spoke volumes. She looked at me with an almost visceral fear, as if the mere touch of that device would unravel her fragile world even further. I didn't press her, didn't force the issue. Instead, I simply squeezed her hand, a silent promise of comfort and protection. "I'm here, honey. Nothing else is going to happen to you." But deep inside, I knew with chilling certainty that this situation had already spiraled far beyond what was acceptable. When the taxi finally pulled up, I helped Sarah inside, supporting her frail body with one arm while clumsily managing a small bag with the other. The journey to the hospital was agonizingly slow. Sarah remained hunched, her head resting heavily on my shoulder, murmuring an endless litany of apologies. "Forgive me, Mom. I didn't want to bother you at this hour, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run here." Each whispered word was a fresh stab to my already aching heart. I was her mother. I had sworn to protect her from every harm. Yet here she was, in the dead of night, broken and seeking refuge from the very man I had once entrusted with her happiness. The taxi halted in front of the hospital, the cold, stark white light of the neon sign above the entrance illuminating the word emergency. I helped Sarah out, her legs barely able to support her. Her body still trembled violently, and she clutched her stomach as if holding on to the last vestiges of her strength. I squeezed her hand tighter, trying desperately to conceal the frantic pounding of my own heart. "I'm here. Don't be afraid," I whispered, though I was equally terrified. Dr. Leticia Figueroa, on duty that night, was already waiting at the door, her expression a mixture of worry and professional gravity. She glanced at Sarah, then at me, but said nothing, simply motioning to a nurse to guide my daughter to an examination room. I followed, my feet feeling as heavy and resistant as lead. When the nurse carefully removed Sarah's thin jacket, I almost gasped aloud. Beyond the visible bruises on her face, her shoulders and wrists were a horrifying canvas of cruelty, purple and reddish marks, silent accusations etched into her tender skin. I stood motionless, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of a nearby table, desperately trying to contain the incandescent rage that threatened to consume me. What did this bastard do to you? The thought screamed in my mind, but I dared not utter it, fearing it would trigger another wave of Sarah's heart-wrenching sobs. Dr. Figueroa meticulously documented each injury, her face grim and unyielding. "We need to do an X-ray," she stated, her voice grave but firm, "to check for any fractured ribs." I nodded mutely, my gaze fixed on Sarah, who lay there, eyes closed, as if trying to escape the brutal reality. While I waited for the results, I descended to reception to complete the necessary paperwork and pay a deposit. My cell phone vibrated incessantly. An unknown number flashed on the screen, but I recognized it instantly. If someone was calling at this hour, immediately after Sarah's arrival at my house, it could only be Robert. A fresh wave of fury surged through me, and I hung up without even answering. He deserved no conversation with me, not after what he had done. Unveiling the deception. When I returned to the examination room, Sarah had finally succumbed to a light, exhausted sleep. I pulled the blanket higher, my hands still trembling uncontrollably. As I gazed at her bruised face, I was transported back in time, remembering the vibrant, cheerful Sarah who used to chase me through the yard, her bright laughter echoing as she shouted, "Mom, look at me." Now, that radiant smile was gone, replaced by the stark reality of wounds and an pervasive fear. I sat by her bedside, watching her sleep, my heart a shattered mess. I was her mother, I had promised to protect her, yet I had allowed her to fall into the clutches of a monster like Robert. Self-blame gnawed at me, but simultaneously a fierce, unyielding flame of determination ignited within my core. I could not allow my daughter to suffer another moment. Never again. After the hospital staff had administered an IV and confirmed she was stable enough to leave, I brought Sarah home. I prepared a glass of warm milk, placed it gently by her bedside, and then quietly closed the door, ensuring she remained undisturbed in her fragile sleep. It was almost dawn, a faint, ethereal light filtering through the window. I stepped out onto the porch, intending to tidy up, when I saw Miss Camilla, our neighbor from across the street, already sweeping her yard. When her eyes met mine, she hurried over, her voice hushed and concerned. "Elizabeth, did something happen at your house last night? I heard some knocking and some crying." I sighed, a weary release of breath, and briefly recounted Sarah's ordeal, how her husband had brutalized her, thrown her out, forcing her to seek refuge with me in the middle of the night. Ms. Camilla's teeth clenched, her eyes flashing with indignant anger. How dare he treat his wife like that? That man has no shame. I simply nodded, unable to articulate the storm of emotions raging within me, but I felt a flicker of solace knowing I had an ally. Suddenly a thought struck me. I remembered Miss Camilla had a security camera positioned at her entrance. "Hey, Miss Camilla," I asked, my voice tinged with a new urgency, "could your camera have recorded anything last night?" She nodded immediately, already fumbling with her phone. She opened an app and showed me the video. The grainy footage depicted Sarah at my doorstep, knocking frantically, her muffled cries echoing eerily in the night. Witnessing that image again sent a fresh wave of pain through my heart, yet I knew, with chilling certainty, that this would be a crucial piece of evidence. I took Miss Camilla's hand, thanking her with every fiber of my being. She simply patted my hand, her grip firm. "Don't forget to get justice for that girl, Elizabeth. I trust you can do it." I retreated to my bedroom, pulling open the closet doors. My police uniform hung there impeccably. The crisp blue shirt, the perfectly creased khaki pants, the belt, and the formidable gun holster, everything seemed to be waiting for me. I took each piece, feeling the rough fabric against my fingers, a tangible reminder of my duty. In silence, I began to change, buttoning each button, adjusting the belt, each movement a silent oath. I was not only Sarah's mother, I was also a police officer, and I would deploy every resource, every ounce of power I possessed to protect her. When I was fully dressed, I picked up the phone and dialed James Ellison, our family lawyer. His voice, thick with sleep, answered on the other end. "Hello? James," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "Start the plan right now." There was a momentary silence, then his voice, now fully awake, responded, "Elizabeth, are you sure?" I answered without a flicker of hesitation. Completely. Get ready. I hung up and walked into the living room. From a drawer, I retrieved my digital camera. I approached the sofa where Sarah was sleeping, carefully pulled back the blanket, and began to photograph each of her injuries: the split lip, the bruised eye, the grotesque contusion on her stomach. Each time the flash illuminated her wounds, I felt as though I wasn't just documenting physical damage, but the profound, insidious lacerations to her very soul. When I finished, I sat at the dining room table, spreading out all the papers in the USB drive containing Miss Camilla's video. I connected the drive to my laptop and meticulously backed up every piece of evidence. Sitting there, watching the screen glow, I knew, with chilling clarity, that from this moment on, there was no turning back. I had entered a war, not just for Sarah, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. The serpent in the house. By the time I finished securing the video from Miss Camilla's camera, the clock read 8 a.m. Sarah was still lost in the depths of sleep, her face swollen, her lips dry and cracked, as if even in her dreams she couldn't escape the pervasive pain. I tiptoed into the kitchen and prepared a bowl of warm chicken soup, the comforting aroma of onion and herbs filling the air. I brought the tray to her bedside and gently woke her. Her eyes fluttered open, her gaze tired and confused, surprised to see me dressed in my police uniform. "Mom," she murmured, then shook her head faintly. "I'm not hungry." I sat beside her, striving to keep my voice as gentle as possible. "To be strong, to move forward, you must eat, honey." Sarah looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and reluctantly took the spoon, swallowing with obvious difficulty. Seeing her so frail, so broken, squeezed my heart. Just a few years ago, Sarah had been a radiant young woman, a constant source of joy, filling our home with her infectious laughter. Now she was merely a shadow of her former self, a wounded ghost haunting the space she once lit up. Driven by a lingering unease about the bruise on her stomach, I decided to take her back to the hospital for another checkup. Dr. Leticia Figueroa received us in the emergency room, her face serious, her usual warmth tempered by professional gravity. She ordered a CT scan immediately to rule out any internal bleeding. While we waited for the results, I settled into the waiting room, pulled out my laptop, and reconnected the USB drive. The video of Sarah appeared on the screen, a horrifying replay. At 1:02 a.m., she was at my front door, knocking desperately, her muffled sobs echoing through the microphone. Watching it again, my heart ached as if I were reliving that night's terror. I copied the video to an external hard drive, password-protected it, meticulously tending to every detail. I knew that what I was doing wasn't just to protect Sarah, but to construct an impregnable wall of evidence against Robert. Just then, Sarah's cell phone rang. The screen displayed Robert Mendez. My heart seemed to stop. I snatched the phone before Sarah could react and immediately powered it off. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Mom, if he finds out I talked, he won't leave me alone." Her voice trembled, as if the mere mention of his name plunged her back into a suffocating darkness. I squeezed her hand tightly, trying to instill some calm, but I said no more, simply glancing at the clock in silence. It was almost 10 a.m. I removed Sarah's SIM card and replaced it with another I had prepared. I wouldn't allow him to find her, wouldn't give him another chance to threaten her. A few agonizing minutes later, the CT scan results arrived, confirming that Sarah had suffered several severe soft tissue contusions, but mercifully, no internal bleeding. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, but the relief was fleeting. The physical wounds on Sarah's body would eventually heal, but the scars etched onto her soul, I knew, would require far more time and care. I took her home and immediately called James Ellison, the lawyer. "I have the medical records and the video from the neighbor's camera," I stated bluntly. He scheduled a meeting at his office that afternoon to meticulously gather all the evidence. Meanwhile, Miss Camilla appeared at my door with a pot of still-warm chicken broth. "This is for Sarah to get her strength back," she said, her voice warm and comforting. "If you need a witness, count on me." I looked at her, feeling her genuine support, and a small measure of strength returned to my weary heart. That afternoon, Sarah tried to rest, but she woke up repeatedly, startled by terrifying nightmares. I sat by her side, trying to soothe her, but she babbled fearfully. Robert pushed me, and Denise, she was in a corner mocking me. Hearing that, my blood ran cold, then boiled with renewed fury. "Who is Denise?" I asked, my voice shaking with unbridled rage. Sarah, her voice weak and strained, explained that Denise was Robert's mistress, that she had brazenly come to their house multiple times, shamelessly parading her presence, overtly provoking Robert to take out his frustrations on Sarah. Her story was like a knife twisting in my gut. I had broken bread with Robert, had welcomed him into my home, believing him to be a decent man who would cherish my daughter. Now, it was revealed he was not only cheating on her, but allowing another woman to humiliate her in her own sanctuary. Sitting by her bed, I retrieved my cell phone and took close-up pictures of the bruises on Sarah's wrists, intentionally including her watch in the frame to establish the exact time. With every flash, I felt I was not only documenting physical wounds, but also the profound, invisible pain my daughter carried. I knew these photos would be irrefutable evidence, but they were also a stark, painful reminder of the unyielding mission I had to accomplish to protect her. A risky alliance. In the late afternoon, I drove Sarah to James's office, carrying a portfolio bursting with all the evidence I had meticulously gathered. He opened it, spreading everything out across his polished mahogany table: the damning photographs of Sarah's injuries, the detailed medical report, and the video evidence on the USB drive. James nodded, his voice firm and resolute. "This is a remarkably solid foundation. Now we simply need to unequivocally prove public adultery, and he'll have nowhere left to run." I gripped the handle of my purse, my knuckles white, a chilling clarity washing over me as I understood perfectly what my next step would be. I was no longer merely a grieving mother. I was a cop, and I would wield every instrument of justice at my disposal to make Robert pay for his heinous crimes. That night, I refused to take Sarah back to my house. I couldn't risk her being in any place Robert could potentially find her. Instead, I left her at Miss Camilla's home, entrusting her to my steadfast neighbor, who opened her doors without question and promised to keep a vigilant eye on her. I returned home alone, my heart heavy with a grim resolve. I shed my police uniform, exchanging it for an old jacket and worn jeans, aiming to blend in, to appear as an ordinary person, not an officer on a mission. I retrieved my digital camera from a drawer, meticulously checked its battery and memory card, and then, with a deep breath, I slipped out to my old car. Each turn of the tires on the familiar road was a stark reminder that I was entering not just a simple drive, but a full-blown war, not only for Sarah's shattered peace, but for the very justice I had sworn to uphold. I parked my car in a darkened alley, strategically positioned near Arch's bar, the place Sarah had identified as Robert's regular haunt. The garish neon light from the establishment cast a lurid glow on a small section of the street. I hunched down in the car, camera in hand, a silent hunter waiting for its prey. Around 8 p.m., Robert's distinctive silver truck appeared, its headlights sweeping through the alley like predatory eyes. My heart quickened, but I remained outwardly calm, clicking the camera into action. Ready. A few minutes later, a woman emerged from the street corner. She was clad in a tight red dress, her lips painted a deep, provocative color. A cigarette held casually between her fingers. She walked with a calculated, almost aggressive confidence. I recognized her instantly. Denise Salgado, the woman Sarah had named Robert's mistress, the architect of my daughter's suffering. Robert switched off the engine, got out, and with an infuriating display of gallantry, opened the door for Denise, wrapping his arm around her waist with sickening familiarity. Seeing him, a torrent of molten fury surged through my veins. He, the man who had sat at my table, who had called me mother-in-law, was now openly embracing another woman while my daughter lay in a bed of bruises and fear. I snapped picture after picture, the neon glow of the bar mercilessly illuminating their faces. Each click of the shutter was a painful stab, yet simultaneously, another crucial piece in the intricate puzzle I was assembling to expose him. I followed them from a discreet distance to a small, nondescript hotel, its flashing red light sign advertising hourly rates. I didn't approach too closely, simply captured a couple more photos of them entering the lobby, hand in hand. Then I drove around to the parking lot and took a clear picture of Robert's truck license plate, ensuring a nearby digital clock was visible in the frame, solidifying the timestamp. Each photograph was a bullet, and I knew I had precisely what would leave him with absolutely no escape. Upon returning home, I immediately uploaded all the photos to my laptop, placing them in a specially designated password-protected folder. With a newfound determination I couldn't conceal, I called James, the lawyer. "I have the photos of his infidelity," I reported, my voice unwavering. "You can clearly see their faces, the car's license plate." James's voice was firm and approving. "Excellent, Elizabeth. Keep them safe. Do not let him know you have them." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, feeling a small surge of relief, knowing I was one step closer to securing justice. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was Sarah, calling from Miss Camilla's number. Her voice sounded distressed, laced with raw fear. "Mom, he just called a friend of mine asking where I am." When she told him she didn't know, he threatened. "Her too. I'm so scared." Hearing Sarah's terror, my heart clenched. My daughter, even in her escape, was still tormented by Robert's insidious threats. "You stay calm, honey," I reassured her, forcing a steady tone. "Stay at Miss Camilla's house. I have him under surveillance." But deep inside, I knew I had to act faster before he found another way to hurt Sarah. The day of reckoning, I immediately contacted Commander Rosales, a trusted colleague at the station. I laid out all the evidence I had meticulously gathered: Miss Camilla's video, Sarah's comprehensive medical history, and the damning photos of Robert's infidelity. "I need you to send a patrol to watch the neighborhood, especially Miss Camilla's house," I stated, my voice hard and resolute. Rosales agreed without a moment of hesitation, though not without a cautionary warning. "Elizabeth, what you're doing is very dangerous, but if you have enough evidence, I'm sure you'll win." I thanked him, and then, just in case, I handed him a copy of the infidelity photos. That night, sleep utterly eluded me. I sat at the dining room table, meticulously organizing all the data into separate files: proof of Sarah's injuries, the camera video, and the photos of Robert's betrayal. Each file was a potent accusation, another step towards bringing Robert's depravity into the light. But despite the methodical work, I couldn't shake the deep, gnawing pain in my heart. I had once considered him a son, had believed he would protect Sarah. Now he had not only betrayed her, but dared to raise a hand to her, to threaten her, all for another woman. That pain, like a deep, festering cut, throbbed every time I recalled Sarah's bruised face. The next morning, I took Sarah to Anas Quiroga, a psychologist James had highly recommended. Sarah desperately needed help to overcome the trauma of the relentless abuse. I waited in the reception room, my heart heavy, watching my daughter walk slowly into the office, her shoulders slumped, a crushing weight in my chest. I, who considered myself a strong mother, a tough cop, had utterly failed to protect her from the man I had trusted. That pain, like a slow-burning fire, flared every time I pictured Sarah's bruised face. While I was sitting there, my phone vibrated. It was Romero Alcazar, the head of the Public Property Registry, an acquaintance from previous dealings. His voice sounded grave and slightly rushed. "Mrs. Arriaga, it's not wise to talk much on the phone, but I just saw your name and your daughter's on a land transfer file. Something strange. If you have time, you should come by." I frowned, bewildered, unable to comprehend what he was talking about. Sarah and I hadn't initiated any transfer paperwork, but a chilling premonition made me stand up immediately. I informed Anais I would return for Sarah later. When I arrived at the public registry, Romero discreetly ushered me into his office. He opened a file, his brow furrowed with concern. "There's something very strange here. This land was transferred to a Denise Salgado last week. Since you didn't call me to confirm, I found it odd." I froze, a sudden rush of icy dread flowing through my veins. "It can't be," I exclaimed. My voice choked with disbelief. "Sarah and I never signed anything." Romero shook his head and handed me the file. "The signatures are here, with your name and your daughter's, and the transaction is already filed." I took the paper, my eyes scanning the shaky, crude signatures that bore no resemblance to ours. "Who came to deliver these papers?" I demanded, my voice dangerously low. Romero replied in a whisper. "The employee told me it was your son-in-law, Robert. He said you had asked him to handle it because you were busy." Hearing that, my blood truly boiled. Robert had not only brutalized Sarah, not only cheated on her, but he had dared to forge our signatures, to steal the land, my father's inheritance, a legacy my family had cherished for generations. I fought to maintain a semblance of calm, asking Romero for a photocopy of the file. He sighed, a weary admission. Someone from in here surely helped him with the paperwork. Before I left, he whispered, "Elizabeth, this is dangerous. Be careful that no one in the office knows I told you." I nodded, thanked him, and promised not to betray his trust. But inside, I felt as if I were walking on a tightrope, knowing that Robert was not merely a violent man, but a cunning manipulator, willing to do anything to achieve his nefarious goals. That afternoon, I picked up Sarah from her therapy session. She looked exhausted, but the panicked fear had receded from her eyes, replaced by a weary resignation. I drove her directly to Lawyer James's office, clutching the photocopy of the forged papers. James reviewed them carefully, tapping the table with his fingers, then stated firmly, "This is the final nail in the coffin. Now we also have irrefutable proof of fraud, more than enough for him to have absolutely no escape." Sarah, sitting beside me, listened in silence, but her eyes welled up with tears. "Mom, he dared to forge the signatures to steal Grandpa's land," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of pain and righteous indignation. I took her hand and squeezed it, attempting to transmit some of my strength, but I too was battling my own profound pain. That land wasn't just a property. It was a living memory. It was the sweat and toil of my father, a sacred trust passed down through generations. And Robert had dared to trample all over it, simply for his ambition and his insidious betrayal. That night, I met with Commander Rosales and gave him the copy of the fake papers. He nodded, his gaze serious. "Your evidence is very solid, Elizabeth. I assure you he won't get away with this." I thanked him, but a heavy weight still pressed on my heart. When I returned home, I locked all the incriminating documents in the small safe in my bedroom. The clock showed almost midnight, yet sleep was a distant luxury. I sat in the dark, contemplating Robert, everything he had inflicted upon Sarah, upon our family. That pain, like a slow-burning fire, both tormented and propelled me. I knew the time had come to confront him directly. There was no other option. Echoes of justice, seeds of hope. On Saturday morning, I left Sarah at Miss Camilla's house, the safest refuge for her at that moment. Commander Rosales had already stationed someone to watch outside, and I knew she would be protected, yet my heart remained unsettled. I donned civilian clothes, an old jacket and jeans, but concealed a file in my bag, packed with the carefully prepared evidence. The photos of Sarah's injuries, the video from the neighbor's camera, the comprehensive hospital report, and the damning photocopy of the fraudulent land papers. I drove my old car to Robert's pawn shop, the place where he conducted his illicit business, where he flaunted his ill-gotten power in town. Each turn of the tires was a potent reminder that this was no mere trip, but an inevitable, decisive confrontation. The pawn shop was open, an oppressive smell of machine oil and stale cigarette smoke hitting me as I entered. Two of Robert's henchmen were idly arranging items on the shelves, casting sideways, mocking glances at me. One of them smirked. "Look, the mother-in-law arrived." I ignored them completely, walking directly to the back office where Robert sat, counting thick stacks of dollar bills piled haphazardly on a wooden desk. He looked up, a fake saccharine smile plastered on his face. "What's up, police mother-in-law? Are you so unoccupied that you have time to visit your son-in-law?" His voice was dripping with sarcasm, but I paid him no mind. I hadn't come to argue or to chat. I placed the file squarely on his desk. Each page was a silent, powerful accusation. The brutal photos of Sarah's bruises, the chilling video from Miss Camilla's camera capturing my daughter's desperate cries in the early morning, the hospital report detailing her horrific injuries, and the irrefutable photocopy of the fake papers he had dared to sign in my and Sarah's names. Robert glanced at them, his face momentarily faltering, but he quickly regained his arrogant composure, masking his surprise with a contemptuous sneer. "And what about these little papers? I have better lawyers than you." I met his gaze directly, my voice cold and unwavering. "I didn't come here to argue with you, Robert. If you want to find out who's right, we'll see each other in court." He sprang to his feet, his voice strained as if I had pricked his inflated pride. Who's going to dare to touch me? Who's going to stand against me in this town? I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in his arrogant, unseeing eyes. I will. Don't think everyone is afraid of you, Robert. The two henchmen at the entrance began to move, approaching menacingly, but I calmly slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, revealing my police badge. They stopped dead in their tracks, their gazes suddenly evasive. Robert's face flushed crimson. He slammed his hand hard on the table, almost shouting, "Your daughter is a weakling. She deserved to be disciplined. And don't think that badge will always save you." Hearing that, my blood boiled with an intensity I had rarely felt. He dared to say that Sarah, my precious daughter, whom I loved more than life itself, deserved to be disciplined. He dared to justify the bruises, the night she had to flee in agonizing pain. I wanted to scream at him, to physically pounce on him, to grab him by the throat, but I held back. I didn't answer. I simply collected the file in silence, tucked it into my bag, and turned to leave. Before I walked out, I turned back one last time, my voice firm and imbued with an iron resolve. Just so you're clear, Robert, from now on, the rules of the game have irrevocably changed. It's not you who's going to discipline anyone. It's the law that's going to discipline you. Robert screamed at my retreating back. If you walk out that door, you stop being my mother-in-law, and then don't complain if I get nasty. I paused, looked at him one last time without a hint of fear. Well, consider that from now on, you are no longer my daughter's husband. I stepped out onto the street, where the wind kicked up dust from the dirt road. I got into my car and immediately called James. "It's time to file the lawsuit," I told him. James replied, his voice calm but cautious. "All right, Elizabeth, get ready. He's going to counterattack with everything he's got." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, my heart as cold and resolute as steel. I knew this war wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. A few days after my searing confrontation with Robert at the pawn shop, rumors began to ripple through the neighborhood like wildfire. Early one morning, as I made my usual trip to the market for vegetables, trying to project an air of normalcy, the whispers reached my ears. Two women at a corner stall leaned close, their voices hushed. "That Sarah probably made it all up," one murmured. "They say she talked back to her husband a lot. That's why he hit her." I walked past them, and they fell silent, but their eyes followed me, filled with judgment, as if I were the one stirring up trouble. In the cafe next door, an old man sipped his coffee, shaking his head. Elizabeth is now using her badge to screw over her son-in-law. Hearing that, it felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. These people, who greeted me every morning, who had smiled warmly at Sarah when she was a child, now so readily believed Robert's insidious lies. I lowered my head, quickening my pace, desperately trying to hide the tears that threatened to well in my eyes. At noon, James called me to his office. He placed a stack of papers in front of me, his voice grave. Robert just hired Hector Valdivia, a prominent lawyer from Mexico City. He's filed a countersuit. He claims Sarah fabricated everything to extort him and that you're abusing your authority as a police officer. I picked up the lawsuit, seeing Valdivia's signature in fresh blue ink. The words on the paper were direct accusations against Sarah and me, portraying us as the villains, the ones attempting to ruin Robert's life. Sarah, sitting next to me, visibly paled. "Mom, he wants to make me out to be a liar," she whispered, her voice trembling. Seeing her vulnerability, my heart clenched. Sarah, my sweet daughter, now had to endure not only the physical bruises, but also the slanderous lies of the man she had once loved. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to impart some of my strength. But inside, I felt an indescribable anguish. I had believed this town, where I was born and raised, would stand by us. But now it seemed the entire world was turning its back. That afternoon, I took Sarah to Miss Camilla's house. As we walked through an alley, I saw Robert's two henchmen standing there, smoking, their eyes fixed on us with malevolent intent. One of them lifted his chin, sneering sarcastically, "Be careful, officer. People around here believe Robert more than you." I didn't answer. I just squeezed Sarah's hand and hurried her into the house. But those words were like stones thrown at my heart, making me feel more isolated than ever. I immediately called Rosales to inform him of the explicit threat. He promised to reinforce patrols at night, but even his voice sounded worried. "Elizabeth, be careful. That guy is trying everything to turn the situation around." I nodded and thanked him, but deep down, I knew I was walking a very dangerous path. That night, I walked to the corner store to buy something to eat. The owner, an acquaintance of many years, discreetly led me to a quiet corner and whispered, "Elizabeth, be careful. People are saying all over town that you made everything up to take the land from your son-in-law." Hearing that, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The people who had been my neighbors, with whom I had shared countless stories, now believed I was a schemer. I thanked her, attempting a strained smile, but as I left the store, I felt as if the world was caving in on me. When I arrived home, I found an unmarked envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a note, scrawled in hurried handwriting, "Shut up, or you lose your daughter." I picked up the paper, hands trembling, not from fear, but from a volcanic fury. Furious that Robert dared to threaten my daughter. Furious that the people around me were so easily manipulated. I carefully filed the note in the evidence folder, knowing it would be another damning piece to unmask him. Late that night, I had an emergency meeting with James at his office. He examined the threatening note, nodding slightly. "Good. The dirtier he plays, the more he tangles himself up. But public opinion is on his side. We need a strong blow to change things, and the only one who can deliver that is Denise." Hearing James mention Denise, a small, fragile light of hope flickered in the encroaching darkness. Denise, Robert's mistress, could indeed be the key to turning this entire terrifying situation around, but at the same time, I knew bringing her to our side wouldn't be easy. I stood there in the dim light of the office, thinking of Sarah, of the bruises on her body, of the lies that were suffocating us. That pain, like a slow-burning fire, both tormented and propelled me. I was not going to let Robert win. I was not going to let his lies obscure the truth. The day after the tense confrontation at the pawn shop, I discovered that Denise frequented a small, unassuming bar at the very end of Hidalgo Street. I knew this was my chance to irrevocably change the course of the game. To turn the tables on the hand Robert thought he had already won. I donned a baggy jacket and a baseball cap, doing everything I could to go unnoticed. As I entered the dimly lit establishment, ranchera music blared from unseen speakers, cigarette smoke hung thick and acrid in the air, and the cloying scent of beer and tequila permeated the atmosphere. I chose a table in a dark, secluded corner, settling in and keeping my eyes fixed on the entrance. I didn't want to be recognized. I didn't want any of Robert's cronies to spot me before I had a chance to speak with Denise. Around 10 p.m., she finally appeared, clad in a short, tight dress. Her lips painted a deep, seductive red, a cocktail clutched in her hand. She walked with a confidence that seemed almost forced, a fragile facade. I observed her, feeling a complex mix of anger and pity. This was the woman who had contributed to my daughter's suffering, yet at the same time I recognized that she was merely another pawn in Robert's cruel game. I took a deep breath, rose from my seat, and walked purposefully to her table, sitting directly across from her. Denise raised an eyebrow, her voice defensive. "And who are you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I simply placed an envelope on the table in silence. Inside was a copy of the fraudulent land papers Robert had so cleverly orchestrated, along with a bank statement for Denise, revealing a mountain of accumulated debts and the imminent risk of foreclosure. I looked her directly in the eyes, my voice sharp and clear. "I'm Robert's mother-in-law. If you stay on his side, you'll go down with him, but if you cooperate, you'll save yourself." Denise let out a mocking laugh, but it died on her lips as soon as she opened the envelope and saw the damning papers. She turned visibly pale, her gaze faltering as she saw the forged signature on the transfer documents and the stark red numbers of her overwhelming debts. I continued, my voice cold but firm. "The police commander already knows everything. As soon as the trial begins, you'll be called to testify for fraud, and you could even face a serious sentence. Is that truly what you want?" Denise remained silent for a long moment, the hand clutching her cocktail, trembling uncontrollably. She downed her drink in one gulp, as if seeking courage, then spoke, her voice shaky. "Robert promised me he'd give me a share of the land. He said everything would be fine, that I would have it all, but now I understand he just used me." Hearing her, I felt a flicker of pity. Denise, though misguided, was another victim of Robert's ruthless manipulation. But I didn't allow my emotions to sway me. I looked at her intently. "You have one last chance to get out of this clean. Tell the truth at the trial. I will take that into account." Just then the bar door swung open, and Robert's two henchmen walked in. Their eyes scanned the room, locking onto me sitting with Denise. They approached, their faces hostile and menacing. Without hesitation, I pulled my police badge from my pocket and placed it squarely on the table. "Want to try something? Go ahead." The dim light of the bar glinted off the badge, and the two men stopped dead, slowly backing towards the door, their eyes still burning with hatred. Denise was breathing heavily, pale as a sheet, clinging to the edge of the table. I looked at her, my voice grave but utterly determined. "See, Robert can't protect you. He's only going to drag you down with him." Denise bit her lip, her eyes torn between fear and a burgeoning determination. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll testify, but you have to promise me I'll be safe." I didn't promise much. I simply nodded. "If you do the right thing, I'll do everything I can." I immediately called Rosales, explained the urgent situation, and asked him to secure a safe apartment on the outskirts for Denise to hide in. Leaving the bar, I walked down the cold, dark street, the wind making me shiver. But inside, I felt a profound sense of relief. I knew the battle had shifted. Robert had just lost his most important piece. The morning of the trial, I woke at 5 a.m., the sky still cloaked in darkness. I went to the kitchen and made a light chicken broth, its gentle aroma attempting to calm the palpable tension that permeated the house. I brought the tray to the bed where Sarah still slept, her face a little swollen, her lips dry, a sight that squeezed my heart. I woke her gently, whispering, "Eat something, honey, so you'll have strength for today." Sarah opened her eyes, her gaze tired, but she nodded and sat up slowly. I helped her into a long, light blue dress and carefully tied a thin scarf around her neck to conceal the last visible bruise. I tenderly brushed her hair and said softly, "You don't have to hang your head anymore, my love." Sarah looked at me, her eyes watery, but she said nothing, simply taking my hand as if it were the only way to feel truly safe. Outside the house, Commander Rosales was already waiting for us with a patrol car. He greeted me with a solemn nod, his look serious but imbued with warmth. "I've arranged an escort, Elizabeth. Everything will be fine today," he reassured me. I thanked him, feeling a small measure of relief, knowing I wasn't alone in this fight. On the way to the courthouse, I saw the townspeople gathered in the square, their voices a low hum of whispers. Some looked at us with raw curiosity, others nodded slightly, as if in silent support, but there were also those who shook their heads with palpable mistrust. The insidious rumors Robert had spread still hung heavy in the air, and I knew that today's battle was not just against him, but to reclaim the very truth that had been distorted. Arriving at the courthouse entrance, I saw Robert. He stood there, impeccably dressed in a pristine suit, his face flushed with anger, his gaze as sharp and dangerous as a knife. Beside him, his lawyer, Valdivia, appeared outwardly calm, but I could sense his underlying tension. Denise was there too, standing a significant distance from Robert, her arms crossed, her gaze distant and unreadable. Seeing her, I remembered the night at the bar, the desperate gamble I had taken to convince her to switch sides, and a spark of hope ignited within me. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that today would not be easy. I took Sarah's hand and led her into the courtroom. Inside, the place was packed, the old wooden benches creaking under the weight of the spectators. I spotted Miss Camila in the back row. She nodded at me encouragingly, a silent promise of unwavering support. Judge Arturo Cervantes entered, and the entire room rose to its feet, the air thick with anticipation. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic whir of the ceiling fan, a monotonous heartbeat in the tense silence of the room. Lawyer James began, his voice deep and confident. He presented our case, each piece of evidence meticulously laid out before the court. The harrowing photos of Sarah's injuries, Dr. Figueroa's detailed medical report, the video from Miss Camila's camera that recorded Sarah's desperate cries in the early morning hours, and the irrefutable copy of the forged land papers that Romero Alcazar had bravely provided us. When James projected the video onto the large screen, Sarah's frantic knocks on the door and her faint, choked sobs filled the room, amplifying the horror. I heard murmurs ripple through the crowd. Some people openly wiped tears from their eyes. I glanced at Sarah beside me. Her hands trembled violently, and her head was bowed in shame and pain. I placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it gently, a silent declaration that I was still there, that I would always be there for her. Lawyer Valdivia rose to rebut, his voice sharp and incisive. Sarah invented everything to extort my client. Elizabeth Arriaga abused her authority as a police officer to coerce and slander. Those words were like daggers plunging into my heart. I wanted to leap up, to scream that he was lying, that Sarah's bruises were not an invention, but James signaled for me to remain calm, a silent command to trust the process. He then presented Robert's threatening messages, which were clearly visible on the big screen. "Shut up if you don't want to be replaced." The room fell silent. Sarah bowed her head even further, her hands trembling more violently, and I knew she was reliving the months she had spent consumed by fear. I squeezed her shoulder again, trying to transmit some of my unwavering strength. Then it was Denise's turn. She took the stand, trembling, her gaze hesitant. "Robert promised to give me a share of the land," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "He pressured me to accept the transfer papers, saying everything was arranged, but the truth is he forged his wife's signature to steal the land from her." Robert abruptly leaped up, shouting, "You betrayed me!" The court guards had to physically force him back into his seat while Judge Cervantes sternly declared, "Order, or I will have you removed from the courtroom." Denise bowed her head but continued to testify, each word a hammer blow shattering Robert's elaborate web of lies. Seeing her, I felt a small sense of relief, but I couldn't entirely shake the pain in my heart. Denise had been a part of Sarah's suffering, but in the end, she had chosen to align herself with the truth. When it was my turn, I took the stand and swore before the court, my voice steady and firm. I looked directly at the people assembled, my gaze unwavering. "I am a police officer, but today I am here as a mother. I will not allow anyone, not even my son-in-law, to destroy my daughter and mock the very law I swore to uphold." I pointed at Robert, without a trace of fear in my eyes. That man is not a husband. He is not a father. He is merely an abuser and a deceitful liar. A wave of murmurs swept through the entire room. Some of the people who had blindly believed Robert now looked at each other, confused and unsettled. I caught Miss Camilla's gaze. She nodded, as if to tell me I had done exactly the right thing. Finally, Judge Cervantes stood to read the verdict. His voice was grave and clear, but I didn't register every single word. I only knew that he issued a comprehensive protection order for Sarah, froze all of Robert's assets, nullified the fraudulent land transfer, and formally sent the case to the district attorney's office to initiate investigations into the crimes of usury and domestic violence. A roar of murmurs filled the room. Robert slumped in his chair, his face pale and drained, as if all his strength had utterly vanished. Valdivia remained silent, slowly taking off his glasses to wipe away the sweat that beaded his brow. I took Sarah's hand and gently led her out of the courtroom. The midday sun shone brightly on the courthouse steps, and I heard people whispering, "Elizabeth won, justice won." But deep inside, I knew that this victory, however significant, did not erase the profound wounds Sarah had suffered. I only hoped that from this day forward she could begin to rediscover her smile. That same afternoon, the police arrived at Robert's pawn shop to execute his arrest. People crowded the street, eager witnesses to his downfall. Some whistled derisively, others shouted insults directly into his face. I wasn't there to witness it firsthand. But the next morning, when the local newspaper prominently displayed a photo of Robert in a prison uniform, his hands cuffed, beneath the stark headline, "Pawn shop owner arrested for violence and land fraud," I felt something strange. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was a profound sense of liberation, as if a suffocating weight had been lifted. He, who had once sat at my table, who had called me mother-in-law, was now finally paying for his monstrous deeds. But that fleeting feeling was quickly replaced by a lingering sadness. I had trusted him. I had believed he would cherish and protect Sarah. The pain of being betrayed by someone I considered family, like a slow-burning ember, still seared deep within me. Denise vanished from town a few days after the trial. Rumor had it she had gone to Monterey, seeking a fresh start, a new life. I couldn't blame her. She had been an unwilling participant in Sarah's pain, but in the end, she had chosen the truth. Robert's 2 henchmen, the ones who brazenly called themselves Los Chamucos, were also arrested for witness tampering. The neighborhood, almost overnight, felt calmer, a heavy weight lifted. There were no more hateful glares, no more silent, insidious threats. But I knew that the wounds Robert had inflicted upon Sarah and upon me would not simply vanish. Sarah moved in with me permanently. The first few days were a struggle. Sleep barely touched her. She would wake up startled every night, drenched in sweat, screaming, "Mom, he's coming!" In those terrifying moments, I would sit by her side, take her trembling hand, and whisper, "It's okay, honey, you're safe now." But seeing Sarah, I saw reflections of myself years ago, when I too had kept silent in the face of my own pain. I took her to Anise Quiroga, the psychologist, every week without fail. Anise listened to Sarah with boundless patience, gently guiding her to confront her nightmares, step by agonizing step. After a few weeks, I began to notice a subtle yet profound change. Sarah no longer covered her face when she went out. She no longer hung her head when she walked through the bustling market. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen, making enchiladas, and as she folded the tortillas, she began to sing softly. That song, as gentle and comforting as a summer breeze, brought tears to my eyes. It had been so long since I had heard my daughter sing. It was as if the sun itself was beginning to re-enter our home. The town, too, began to shift its attitude. The neighbors who had doubted us, who had believed Robert's malicious rumors, now greeted me with a newfound respect. Some even approached me, their voices filled with regret, to offer sincere apologies. "Mrs. Elizabeth, we truly didn't know the truth." I simply nodded, without resentment. I understood that Robert's lies had been incredibly convincing, and not everyone possesses the courage to stand up to someone like him. Miss Camilla came to visit, bearing a tray of sweet bread, and hugged Sarah tightly. "You turned out even stronger than your mother in her day," she said warmly. Seeing them laugh together warmed my heart, a poignant reminder that kindness and empathy still existed, even after the darkest days. I continued my work at the station, each daily patrol a constant reminder of my unwavering duty. Every time I encountered a case of violence, I felt an even deeper determination to help other women break the suffocating chains of silence. Once, I found a young girl crying hysterically outside the station, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching her purse tightly. I sat next to her and said in a soft, steady voice, "You are not alone. My mother lived it, my daughter lived it, and I too stayed silent once. But today I know that silence only feeds the monster." The girl looked at me, tears still streaming down her face. But there was a new glint in her eyes, a spark of nascent hope. I knew I couldn't erase her pain, but at least I could show her that someone was willing to listen, truly listen. A few months later, Sarah felt strong enough to return to work. She secured a job in an accounting office in the town center. That night, she came home late, opening the door with a radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "Mom, I got the job!" I stood up and hugged her with all my might, and we both cried. They weren't tears of pain, but of pure, unadulterated joy, of profound liberation. Seeing Sarah there, smiling like the rising sun, brought back vivid memories of the little girl who used to chase me through the yard, shouting, "Mom, look at me." I knew the deep wounds in her heart were still there, but she was learning to move on, to rediscover herself, to heal. That night, I sat on the porch. The wind blew coolly, rustling the leaves in the ancient trees. I remembered the night Sarah had collapsed at my door, her face a canvas of bruises, telling me in a trembling voice what Robert had done to her. I remembered the arduous months of struggle, the sleepless nights, the moments I thought I would break under the relentless onslaught of lies and the corrosive mistrust of the entire town. But then I thought of Sarah's radiant smile today, and I whispered to myself, "Justice is sometimes slow, agonizingly slow, but when it finally arrives, it can give you back your breath, your laughter, and even your future." I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold now, but I felt a deep, abiding peace in my heart that I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Sarah had returned to herself, and I, though I carried the indelible scars of the past, had found a new reason to keep fighting, not just for my daughter, Tiffany, but for all the women who desperately need someone to stand up for them. This story, though fictionalized, is inspired by real events. Names and places have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We share this not to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen, truly listen, and stop to consider. How many mothers are suffering in silence, trapped within the confines of their own homes? I'm genuinely curious. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose silence to maintain a fragile peace, or would you dare to face it all, to reclaim your voice and demand justice? Your thoughts matter because every story shared is a candle that can illuminate someone else's path through the darkness. May God always bless you, and I firmly believe that courage, however daunting, inevitably leads us to brighter days.